welcome you all here today. I'd like to thank our partners, the Australian Intercultural Society, the Shepherd and Albanian Muslim Society, and of course the Islamic Museum of Australia for making this facility available, and of course the Department of Veteran Affairs for their funding of this film. This film came about, before I start, I'd like to thank a few of other dignitaries here today, people who've helped make this film possible. I'd like to thank the President of the Shepherd and Albanian Muslim Society, Reg Kreml, who's here, the Imams of the Mosque, Husni Mirja and Ilhan Bardi. I'd also like to thank the President of the Gulf Force Association, Trevor Winnell, for his participation in the film and openness, and the Jamali family for their participation, which has made a big part of the film. And finally, I'd like to thank my colleague, Professor Ihsan Yilmaz, who was also a partner on the grant for this film. The story behind this film came about 6 years ago when I was working with Professor Yilmaz on a project to do with Muslim communities in Australia before the Second World War, primarily looking at Shepparton, the city of Shepparton in central Victoria, and the Albanian community. In the course of that research, I came across a number of these migrants from Albania who had served in the Australian Army during the Second World War in various capacities. Some of them had been classified as enemy aliens, as Albania was occupied by Italy during the Second World War, and they had been, as a way of getting away from being interned, had decided to join employment units of the Army. Others had been naturalised and enlisted, and some had not been naturalised and they enlisted anyway and served in the Army in combat battalions. So it was quite a mix. In the course of following this thread, I was interested to see if there were other Muslim soldiers who'd served in World War II, and I found out that there were quite a number. There were many Malays and Indonesians who had come to work in the pearling industry in WA and Darwin, who had been in a similar way evacuated south because of the threat of the Japanese, and had ended up in employment battalions or transport battalions before being recruited to special forces because they had both the language ability, but also they looked like people from Southeast Asia, they knew Southeast Asia, so that they could go behind enemy lines and fight against the Japanese. In addition, I found a number of Australian-born Muslims who participated. Unfortunately, none of their stories have made part of the film today, but we're hoping in the future that we can expand this project and tell a few of their stories as well. This film looks at four men in particular who were in various units during the Second World War. They are Muharrem Ali, who was in the Gulf Force and was a POW in Ambon. They are Samsudin bin Khatib, who was in the Z Special Unit, Special Forces, who served in Borneo. Abu Qasim bin Marra, whose story is especially interesting, who served in the Z Special Unit and has a deep connection to Australian politics today, as his children are the half-sisters of Senator Pat Dodson. And finally, of Layla Jamali, who is one of the stories that came late to the piece, but thanks to the Jamali family, forms a significant part of this story. There are a number of other soldiers that we had hoped to include but weren't able to, and I'd just like to tell you briefly about them so that we can provide some context of some of the other interesting stories that weren't able to be made but are worth pursuing. There's Kurt Ali Rahman, the Kurbechi of Kokoda, who fought at Kokoda, an Albanian migrant, and was killed in the Battle of Bunagona and buried in Papua New Guinea. There's Vaid Ismail Voskopi, another Albanian, who was in a work battalion and served in the details depot in Ley, in Papua New Guinea as well. So not all of those who were recruited into work battalions, they weren't in combat battalions, stayed in Australia. Many of them actually travelled to the front line. Arthur Saron, who was from Mackay in Queensland, third generation Javanese Australian, who served in the 2nd 26th Battalion and was captured in the fall of Singapore and spent the rest of the war in the Changi POW camp. Corporal Muhammad Sharif, a Malaysian national who fought with Z Special Unit, was captured and executed by the Japanese in Borneo. Ali Muhammad, who served with the 15th Australian Field Ambulance, was an ambulance driver in Papua New Guinea for more than 12 months and served despite suffering heavily from Malaysia throughout that time. Field Sergeant Mohadin Abdul Riaz Hossan, another Australian-born Muslim who was a pilot serving with the Royal Air Force, who was shot down by the Germans over France in 1942, and passed away. He was killed in action. Billy Bosser of New South Wales, who served with the 2nd AIF Pioneers and was killed in action in New Guinea. And finally, Lance Sergeant Maruf bin Khalid, who had stories especially fascinating, served several times for Z Special Force behind enemy lines, but before being killed in action towards the end of the war in Semoy, Borneo. So we're hoping in future that we want to talk a little bit today about how this film is a snapshot of the biggest story that needs to be told. We also want to, of course, ask for a bit of your forgiveness because we've made this film quite quickly over the last couple of months to fulfill the needs of the grant. So we haven't quite got the archival footage right yet. We still need to secure funding to get higher resolution, so quality footage. But we're hoping that with what we have now can illustrate a lot of the main points that we're trying to make in this film. Finally, I think that the important part of this film is it's often taken for granted. One of the reasons why Isla and I were looking at Muslims in Australia before World War II is it's often felt that Muslims are a recent presence in this country. We talk about Macassans, we talk about Afghans in the 19th century, but that kind of disappears after that. But there has been a continual Muslim presence in this country since the beginning of colonisation and before. And this idea that Muslims served in World War II is something that sometimes shocks people to know this. It's also an important aspect of this film is to show that not all these Muslims are the same. These are not a stereotype of Muslims that you would see on television. Some of these Muslims were religious, some of them were not. Some of them were Sunni Muslim, some of them were Bektashi Muslim. They came from different sects, from different traditions, they spoke different languages, they had different objectives in life and different dreams. One of the things that brings them all together, however, was that they were all adventurers in one form or another. They were all people who left their homes and had to navigate the white Australia policy to be able to come to this country and work in this country. And then, despite the laws that were or the system that was sometimes stacked against them, they were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice and die for this country when the need arose. So in this way, I hope that this film not only tells us a little bit more about the fabric of Australian society, but also tells us a bit about the type of human beings that these men were. So I hope that you enjoy the film. Thank you.